There's an old Buddhist saying that says, a person cannot live fully until they face the fact that they will surely die. And there's a lot of truth in that. But death and dying and grief are all parts of life. But it's something that can't be avoided, and so it's something that must be dealt with. And hardly any place in our lives do we get any instruction on how to deal with death and dying. This is just a very brief video on some things to consider, how you deal with yourself and with other people through the process. It's kind of the ultimate questions in life. When does human life end? What happens afterwards? Should people be able to decide when they die? Is that a choice you make? Is that a choice left to God? Is that a choice left to the state to decide? And should people be told when they're dying? Would you really want to know when you were dying? All very tough questions that we have to face toward the last part of life. Should people have the option to die at home? Do you know, when polled, virtually everyone as they get older say that their first choice would be to die at home, and yet only a very small percentage of people have that opportunity. Most people end up dying in a hospital in a very sterile environment. And there are lots of reasons for that. Fortunately, in this country, there's a new movement that really started up in the last 20 or 25 years called the hospice movement. And the hospice is a way that people can be supported if they choose to have a loved one die in their home setting. This is an option that I chose with my late wife. We decided between us that she would like to die at home, and that I would like to give her the privilege of having that happen. And so we contacted hospice, and they're excellent. They give you nursing support and counseling support and medical support 24/7. There wasn't a time with anything that came up when I was giving care to my wife. They would come 24/7. They came out once or twice a week, especially toward the end of life. They came out more often. They would ensure that we had all the drugs we needed for pain, that we had all the resources we needed, oxygen, anything else that might be needed to make for a peaceful end of life. This movement also is becoming very popular with something called palliative care. And palliative care is really not treating people as if you're going to cure them. For example, with cancer. When you have an 80-year-old person who has cancer, the likelihood of them being cured of the cancer is very small. And as a matter of fact, the treatment they get is sometimes more horrendous and leads to an earlier death than would happen if they were just left on their own. So the medical community is starting to do something called palliative care, in which you try to give people the highest quality of life by managing pain, by extending people's useful time, but not attempting to provide a cure, because we just don't have enough information on how to do that well. There are lots of reasons why to consider hospice. For the caregiver and the receiver, both of them get services. Another one that people don't know about is if you're under the care of hospice, the official care of hospice, and you have specific life requests on what you want done after you have died. For example, my wife Linda had very specific requests. She wanted to be cremated. She did not want a public funeral of any kind. She wanted people to have private remembrances. Hospice, we were able to do all of that. If a person dies at home and they're not under the care of hospice, you must dial 911. They have to come and pick you up in a emergency vehicle. You're taken to a hospital where you must remain until you're pronounced dead by the appropriate authorities, at which time you can be transferred to whatever funeral home or funeral wishes that you might have. With hospice, the funeral home came directly for her at the house, took the crematorium, which is what she had requested, and did not have to go through any of the legal processes. The hospice nurse could come out and do a temporary death certificate to declare the death, and then you get an official death certificate shortly thereafter. There are just so many benefits, and I highly recommend anyone who is working with someone who needs care toward the end of their life to look into hospice. People avoid being with people who are dying for a variety of reasons. Most of them are fear of the unknown, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. We have all kinds of rationalizations for why we don't go and meet with people who are dying. So here are things to do that you would want to do when you're around people who are dying. The first one is just be there. You don't really have to say anything or do anything. It's just comforting to have someone there at the last stages of life. I mean, can you imagine being in a hospital all by yourself, not having anyone you care about with you as you go through your final moments? So just be there with the person. Hold their hand, brush their hair. Do you know the research says that people who are dying, even if they don't have a communicable disease, hardly ever get touched? And we as human beings thrive on human touch. We have, all mammals have tickle skin, and tickle skin is that we enjoy being touched and caressed and have our hand held, and it's just part of what makes us human. It's okay to ask questions. Say, how are you feeling? That's a good question. What did the doctor say? That's a good question. Feel free to tell them what they mean to you. Remind them of the positive experiences or lessons you learned or things you've done together that were really important to you in your life. It's a really good time to let you tell them how important they are to you, and then to let them reminisce about those same experiences. Say, I love you. One of the biggest regrets people have after a person dies is they didn't tell them often enough how they really felt about them and cared about them. Another one is just let them talk. People, as they get to the end of their life, really need to do a life review. It helps them to pass more peacefully into the next lifetime. Let them talk. And what do they remember? What do they enjoy? What were the good things in their life? Take them to a happy place. Think of memories that were very fond for both of you and review them together. Play music together that you both enjoy. Pray together. It's important to take them somewhere where they feel peace and happiness and tranquility, and you can be part of that. It's a very great gift to give. The last one I have on this list is very interesting because most people don't think of it this way. You should give permission to die. And when my father was dying, his biggest concern was that someone would be there to take care of my mother. And so it was not easy, I'll have to tell you, but when my father was in the last days, a couple of days of his life, he needed to be reassured. And so I said, Pop, be assured that I will and my brothers and sisters will take care of Mom and make sure she's well cared for. It's okay. You can now go on to the next experience. So they need permission. One of the hardest things, if you can imagine it, would be to feel guilty that you're dying because you have things that you're supposed to do and responsibilities that you still want to meet. So reassure a person that it's okay. We'll take care of things. Things go now in peace. Things to avoid saying when you're with a dying person is, I know you want to reassure them, but don't tell them everything will be fine. Because in the terminal parts of life, if fine means getting better, they will not be fine. Don't tell people you can't live without them. Again, it's that notion of guilt. If you say, I can't live without you, what am I going to do without you? I can't stand it. Then they end up feeling very guilty at the end. Instead, if you give them permission and you say, I will surely miss you forever, and I will remember you forever, and it's okay. I'll guarantee to you that I will survive, and I'll do it in your memory. So what do you say about those people who are dealing with grief? Your grandmother after your grandfather dies, or your father when your mother dies, or whoever it might be. How do you deal with them? And again, we kind of avoid them. We try to avoid people who are grieving, mainly because we don't know what to say or do. So here's the things you should do and say. One is, just give the person a hug. And again, questions you can ask. Say, how are you doing? Do you need anything? It's really important to ask people also when they're going through grieving, especially if it's a person very close to them. Ask them to do things. Hey, let's have lunch. Let's go to lunch. And don't be pushy, but be specific and say, can we go to lunch next Wednesday? If what most of us feel like is, we don't want to be too pushy, and so we say, oh, well, they'll call us whenever they're ready. But you know what? They won't. When people are going through grieving, they tend to isolate themselves, and they tend to become very hermit-like. And so you've got to be persistent, but not pushy. Just be there. Go over to their house, hang out with them, be there with them. You don't have to say anything. Watch TV together. Just being there brings comfort. And ask them very specifically, what can we do? Where can we go? My stepson would do this for me. My stepson would come over, and he would just sit, and we'd watch a movie, and, and then he would say, Dad, you are taking me out to dinner tonight. And we went out to dinner and to a movie, and he kind of forced me into getting back into life when all I wanted to do was grieve and be home and be alone. That's good for a time. It's important for a time, but then you have to reestablish your life. Things to avoid saying and doing, thinking that people want to be alone. Again, that's true for a short period of time. Or saying, call me whenever you want to go out. People just don't call. And never say, I know how you feel. No matter, even if you've experienced the same kind of loss, you really don't know how a person feels. Each of us feels specifically different when we go through those experiences. So be there, be there for them. Back to my stepson. He ended up taking me to a movie that came out. There were actually two of them he took me to. One was called Yes Man, and it was a Jim Carrey movie, and it was about a person who kept saying no to everything. He was kind of a shut-in, and it's a cute movie. It's funny. It's not very deep at all. But what people who are grieving tend to do is to say no to everything in life, and so they need someone who can help them learn to say yes again. And the other movie he took me to was the movie Up. I highly recommend it. It's a movie that I realized was about my life. Compressed into just a short little 2-hour Disney movie was the whole cycle of life and how it works from the very beginning all the way to the end, and what happens after a person dies. So how do we cope? How do we cope with the loss of someone when we love them? The first one is to remember them fondly. To remember the good things. Don't remember the arguments, but remember the good times you had together. That's good for you and good for them as well. Pick something in life that's a pleasant reminder to you. When my father died some years ago, my sisters and brothers and I got together and said, let's think of something that reminds us of Dad. And so my father he was amazing at finding money laying on the ground. And so we decided that any time we found a coin or whatever money laying on the ground, we would pick it up, think that Dad had placed it there for us to remember him. And so if you can imagine this, sometimes I'll be walking through the parking lot of Kroger and I'll find a penny laying on the ground, and I'll run over, pick up the penny, pick it up, kiss it, put it in my pocket, and think of my dad. Now, from the outsider, someone might say, that cheap bastard, look at him, for a penny, he's just kissing it, putting it in his pocket. Oh my goodness, how cheap can you get? And it doesn't really matter what they think, but it reminds me of Dad. Others is to commit certain kinds of acts of kindness. You know, if the person you loved would do food pantries or work for Habitat for Humanity or do any kinds of positive activities, you can do acts of kindness in their memory. That works out really well. I give to charities in the memory of the people who are closest to me who have passed on. I actually have a scholarship I did in the name of my deceased wife, so that it pays for books for students forever. It's an endowed scholarship. Think about how you've been changed for the better for having them in your life. What was the positive impact of having them? How are you a better person? And when you think of how you're a better person and try to grow it, think of them again. It gives you credit, gives them credit. Another thing when you're coping is to become freely involved in the emotions, and that means you got to work through your grief. You can go through support groups if you need to. It's time to cry, and cry heartily. That's the way you get to move beyond grief. You never forget a person, but you can move beyond the very strong emotional components of the grief. The last thing I'll tell you is think about the person. If you grieve too long or you regret too much, and you don't move on in your life, think of how the person who you loved and who loved you would feel if they knew that you were grieving and holding back and regretting all kinds of things that they did? Would they want that of you? When I think of my wife, we had a deal where we said that no matter which one of us went first, we would grieve for a period of time. And we kind of just randomly said a year, no more than a year of grieving. And then after a year of grieving, we had to let each other go. I had to let her go so that she could move on to what happens after this lifetime. And she would let me go so I would move on and have a life again. And it's worked that way. Several years ago, I remarried. I enjoy so many things in life. I still love my first wife of 40 years and cherish all the memories and experiences, but I'm also enjoying my life now. That's exactly what she would want me to do, I know for a fact. As the Buddhist philosopher said, we can't learn to live fully until we face the fact that we'll surely die. And the people who die ahead of us are there to teach us lessons on how to refocus our lives and how to live our lives to the fullest. Thanks.